Welcome, everybody. I am joined again by Simon Erickson from Seven Investing. Thanks for coming back again. We want to talk a little bit about quantum computing.
Nick, it's a pleasure to be here, man. You and I have been chatting about individual stocks almost a decade, I feel like it's been, and it's just been so rewarding to see we're both on the same page and helping individual investors making better decisions. It's always fun to have these conversations with you.
I think everybody, hopefully you've seen it, it'll be available soon on Simon's channel. There was part one of this conversation that we just did live. I wanted to pick up one thread from that before we talk about quantum computing, because there's so many different directions the future could travel on with computing scale up and performance. One of them is SpaceX, which just had its IPO last week, biggest IPO ever. All of the promise in SpaceX. Is this like Elon gearing up to deliver like he did in the early days of Tesla on these outlandish promises? Or in your view, is this kind of like overpromise, potential underdeliver, which Elon has also done at points in not so distant past?
It's both of those, exactly. It is certainly overpromise and underdeliver because that is what Elon does. If you look at the timelines of Tesla and when Elon promised us full self-driving, we still aren't there yet, and it was promised 5 years ago. And even before that, Elon has kind of gotten in the habit of doing this. But that does not take away from the fact that he is doing very difficult things, and it's hard to put a timeline on any of that stuff. And if you want to go out and build orbital data centers, which is what you and I were just talking about for SpaceX, is it going to hit the timeline that investors in Wall Street's going to want it to see? I don't think so. And we just gave him $75 billion. But on the other hand, he did just get $75 billion to do something that no one else has attempted to do before. And if anyone's qualified to do it, it's probably Elon Musk. So I think it's somewhere between, yes, it is going to be overpromise and underdeliver because that's how you raise capital, and Elon does that a lot. But on the other hand, this is certainly moving the bar when it comes to innovation, no doubt about it.
For all the overpromise and underdeliver items on the timeline, there is a SpaceX in existence doing pretty incredible technological feats. In chatting with Casey over the weekend, it is pretty interesting to see, just thinking about popular culture, a lot of the sci-fi that's come out in recent years, I feel like is not so imaginative like it has been in decades past. A lot of the popular sci-fi is things that are really believable because we're not that far from it happening. And I feel like data centers in space, as crazy as it sounds, as bad of an idea as that may sound to some people, it does make sense. And I can see it happening potentially within the next decade.
In a broader sense too, and I've opened up a whole can of worms by even saying this, but it's so interesting for guys like you and I to even talk about it. The course of disruption is changed now that Elon has a lot of money. Disruption traditionally happens when you're at a very small scale and you're serving the underserved minority of customers that want to do it differently or better than the status quo is allowing them to. And that's why you got these companies that are doing all these neat things, they're serving the minority group, and then all of a sudden they get bigger and bigger, and then they become multiple billions of dollars of companies. SpaceX is a disruptor that is worth $1.8 trillion. And all of a sudden doesn't have to start here at the bottom. They can just start here at the top and develop this entire industry with a ton of money. Just the path of disruption has been forever changed by Elon Musk.
Yeah, agreed. As space becomes more accessible, you're rewriting the rules of what exactly are you manufacturing for, but also something very fundamental and basic like the construction industry, which is booming in the United States because of data centers. If this becomes a thing, you have another option by launching what you manufacture into space versus building it and then deploying it on the ground. It's really interesting the fundamental level that infrastructure is changing right now. Speaking of infrastructure, I know this is something that you are dabbling in, Simon, quantum computing.
This is something that I feel like it's suddenly a big deal, but it's actually been something that's been worked on for 2 decades at least. And I've been a fan of going to the MIT MTech conferences for years in person and taking notes. And they've got entire departments that have been dedicated to this because it's not easy. Quantum computing itself is not just one thing. It's lots of things. It's lots of different technologies, lots of different approaches. But the whole idea is, what if you could solve these incredibly complex problems by defining all the possible outcomes simultaneously? So all of a sudden, rather than having to run things through a code on a CPU or doing those codes in parallel with the GPU, what if you could solve everything instantaneously using quantum mechanics? The analogy is if you're going through a maze, one approach to solving the maze is you put a rat through it, he goes to a dead end, okay, that doesn't work. You go through another one, that doesn't work, until finally you trace out the path in series of code of executing things. Or you could flood the entire maze with water and figure out which one flows most continuously through the maze. That's what a quantum computer is doing. It's defining all of the inputs and all of the potential outputs simultaneously and then very efficiently solving very difficult problems. And the first step of this, Nick, has been from an R&D perspective, how do you build a quantum computer? How do you even do this? Then how do you get something like this to be economical enough that somebody would even want to pay for it? And then now the third phase, I would say, maybe call it the third inning of this, which is where we are today, is companies start putting budgets into projects that harness quantum computing. And you see the graphic from McKinsey here. Companies are actually putting to work budgets for use cases. In fact, more than 50% of companies that are even interested in quantum right now are spending at least $5 million annually on either defining problems or consulting with the experts in the industries to do this, or even having actual projects in place. That's great. We've got millions of dollars being spent by companies to figure this out, but then also look at the bigger impact of what we think this is going to achieve. Quantum computing could deliver $1.3 trillion to $2.7 trillion in economic value to companies by 2035. That's a consultant that puts that together. Take this with a grain of salt, but still, those are the same numbers we saw with software as a service and cloud computing industry, which is now all of how computing is done. This is going to be a very, very big deal. We don't know what the timeline is necessarily going to look like, but we are starting to see the budgets in place for the use cases of companies that want to play with it.
And even closer to recent past, we saw this type of economic value creation number thrown around with AI. Somehow, at least some people out there are still debating what AI even is in the first place. Obviously, there's economic value being created, or you wouldn't see tens and now hundreds of billions of dollars flowing into it. So the timeline is, in my mind, the big question here. But we've seen progress on this happen, like with Google. It seems we're at about every 1 year pace, we get an announcement from Google that they've made some incremental improvement in fault tolerance or some potential real world problem being solved by their superconducting computer. So we're creeping along here. And with every passing year, I think we're getting closer to this.
I think so. And when you look at the graph on the right there, you can almost certainly figure out there's going to be a lot of money at stake for quantum computers to be used at scale if they are significantly more efficient. If you can't define all the inputs and all the potential outputs, where is that actually really valuable? Think about drug development. Think about how many companies out there want to create a blockbuster drug that's selling $1 billion annually, but it still has to get through the FDA trials and have to show efficacy and safety on all these things. If you can even get any kind of reduction to the timelines of getting that approved, and then also ramping that up the scales to $1 billion or more. That's why drug development and protein folding and all these things for pharmaceutical companies are so interested in quantum. Energy is $1 trillion market in the United States alone. All of the bottlenecks of energy and the grid and demand response and things like this, it's just massive in scale. If you could get any kind of improvements out of something like that, you're saving tens of billions of dollars a year. You would gladly pay for a quantum to do things like that. And then see the other stuff like financial industry, global energy materials. There's applications out there that are demanding of things like this. That's where you're going to see the first quantum computers really gaining a lot of traction from the market.
Good stuff. Let's move on to the next thing then. The companies themselves that are working on this stuff. We have to start with IonQ, as controversial as it may be, because they are the leader in revenue. A lot of that because of acquisition. They're going to get a nice little bump up in revenue when they complete the SkyWater acquisition. But the fact that you see the big jump in revenue in 2025, indicative that, like you said, Simon, there are budgets being put behind this and their trapped ion technology. What kind of actual problems are these guys working on right now? Obviously, you can't say this is a commercial scale business yet, but with these labs and government entities putting budgets behind this, what's going on here with IonQ, besides the acquisition and stock issuance controversies?
Yeah, the trade-off is with quantum, you either get speed or stability, but it's really hard to do both. And so IonQ, in my opinion, is addressing the stability of this first. When you do an ion trapping, they go out there and they toot their own horn and say, world record 99.99% 2-qubit gate fidelity. That just means that these are stable. They can actually run the quantum algorithms pretty stable, if not as fast as some of the other technologies out there. This is the one that can work. And you start going out there and get the customers, like we saw in those previous graphics, that want to start playing with quantum. You can use these. IonQ, I believe, is working with Amazon for quantum computers you can actually tap into if you wanted to run the machine right now. The first publicly traded company, a pure play quantum computer company. Look at that number, $130 million in revenue versus a $21 billion market cap. And I have no idea what it's even at today. This was at least a month old or so. And now they've got the manufacturing. The SkyWater technology acquisition in Austin is so that they can actually start ramping up from R&D idea to we've actually got customers that want a quantum computer. How can we actually deliver it for them? And so this was one that kind of got attention a couple of years ago. You can see there was a U.S. Air Force research project. They had a DARPA project that was in there too. The KISTI is the Korea Institute of Science and Technology Innovation. So a lot of this was academic R&D work. Now we're starting to see with the CEO coming out there in the most recent shareholder letter saying that more than 60% of revenue is originating from the commercial sector. These are not massive projects yet. They're still small scale projects that have the potential of ramping up. But still, when you just say 2/3 of revenue is coming from the commercial sector, that kind of sounds like Palantir, who goes from doing government contracts for intelligence and missions that the Army's working on out there to the commercial sector now all of a sudden wanting to use its platform. This kind of feels like a similar trajectory to me, at least how quantum's being experimented with.
Interesting. I agree. It feels like we're getting close to something more meaningful here. But a question on this, you mentioned that addressing the manufacturing side with SkyWater. Some of SkyWater's customers are quantum computing peers and or competitors to IonQ. What do you make of an acquisition like that? Is this for IonQ to manufacture its own quantum computing infrastructure? Is this like a little bit of corporate espionage? Is it them just buying revenue and a bit of profit to self-fund? What's your take on that?
It's always murky. You don't want to compete with your customers out there. We saw the same thing in the genomic sequencing machinery space a couple of years ago. Are you going to compete by selling the tools to others, or are you going to sell the final package that's going to then compete against your customers that you were selling the tools to? I think it murkies the water, but I think IonQ wants to grow as quickly as they can and maybe is taking a little bit of a less sensitive approach that they could. I think that there is factors that are going to maybe come back and bite them on this. But on the other hand, they see where the opportunity is from the market. So they're going after it with that, with the SkyWater acquisition.
Yeah, this manufacturing is definitely an underappreciated part of this whole equation. I got to chat with the CEO founder of a private quantum company working on the supply chain and logistics and manufacturing side of this. And that is a challenge. Modern data centers not using quantum computing cost tens of billions of dollars these days. And pretty basic early stages quantum computer is going to be in that ballpark. Depending on the technology used, that'll be a big factor. And then also ongoing operating expenses getting layered on top of that. It's interesting to see what they end up doing with SkyWater after that acquisition is closed. I can see it being a strategic asset for them. How they manage it is going to be critical, I think.
It gets murky. The sequencing analogy I made earlier was a company called Illumina, who you and I are familiar with, went out and acquired a company called Grail. Actually, they originally spun it off into a separate entity. Then they tried to pull it back in-house. They had regulatory pushback, and now Grail is a publicly traded separate entity again. It's just sometimes it's better to have those clearer lanes of who's doing what so you can focus on what you want to do really well and what your role in the market is versus trying to do things that there's a little bit more hesitation from your customers or a little bit broader. What's the swim lane for you look like versus the swim lane for me? Going to get a little bit murkier in this, and I think regulatory is going to come into this at some point too for quantum, just because it is so new. When we start getting deals in place, customers signing up, and real revenue showing up, you're going to come back and address a lot of that stuff for sure.
Interesting times. Let's go to another one that you cover, Infleqtion. Very different technology, and thus probably very different use cases compared to IonQ. Infleqtion, it seems like, going to be addressing quantum sensing. But another IPO went public via SPAC just early this year, using neutral atom quantum computing hardware, using cesium atoms. This one vastly smaller, but has a critical partner. What caught your attention, Simon, with Infleqtion?
This is a conceptual idea. This is not a company yet. They raised a lot of money with this SPAC IPO in February, but you have zero revenue. And the whole thesis of investing is that second bullet point. Can you have a neutral atom that's manipulated using lasers rather than ionizing a ytterbium atom and then trying to manipulate that like the ion trapping approach is doing? Can you run this that's at room temperature and with very minimal interference, and is it going to work? And if it does, and you can actually show there's a longer coherence time, more stability, something like this is much, much more scalable, potentially, if they can get this to work very well. And that's why you raised so much money. That's why they went public at the time that they did. To answer your question about other than the approach, the technological approach, which is very interesting, NVIDIA is very interested in this as well. You've seen Jensen talk at the GTC conferences about how he wants to partner with quantum computing companies. He doesn't necessarily see them as a threat, but a complement to how NVIDIA's GPUs are doing a lot of the workloads right now for AI. He just wants a partner that if there's certain things that GPUs simply cannot handle, let NVIDIA play a part of that too. He wants to invest in those companies, promote them, and scale them as well. And so this partnership that Infleqtion has with NVIDIA already would basically be using their own Q-Link interface to figure out what tasks get delegated to NVIDIA and the GPUs through CUDA today versus what would go to the quantum for the quantum algorithms too. And how can you actually pair those together for really hard things? That's a really hard problem to solve for a company that hasn't shown any revenue yet, but it's generally a good thing when you have even got the attention of the world's most valuable company in the stock market.
Yeah, it could be a potential indicator of something very quickly coming down the line. That last one that we'll talk about specifically here that just IPO'd, still majority controlled by Honeywell. This is my one and only quantum pure play bet at the moment, both via Honeywell and a little bit of Quantinuum itself, basically a small tracking position at this point. What's going on with this one? Been around for a while under the cover of Honeywell, but now we get a bit more insight on what they're actually working on.
Yeah, that's interesting, Nick, that you said this is the only one that you've actually taken a position in, because similarly, this was my favorite of the litter as well. I actually thought it had the most potential. It had the backing. It was kind of born out of Honeywell for the hardware side of it. Honeywell makes great systems. They're doing work with digital twins and airports and kind of like these really complex things. They do that really well. And so it makes sense that they would translate into start trying to figure out how to do a quantum. It's also ion trapping, so it's similar to IonQ in that regard, but they've also got the resources to kind of build out the whole full stack ecosystem that you would need for a quantum computer. Using quantum to solve really hard problems, you've got to protect that from bad people that might want to steal that information. So how can you secure yourself outside of RSA encryption technology like we've gotten used to in the world today? I mean, there's going to be another layer of cybersecurity protection for quantum algorithms that they're trying to attack as well. And my slide says private. They're actually now public. Quantinuum did just IPO. They are a publicly traded company. Kind of neat to see them coming into the public markets right now, too. I've got a lot of respect for what they're working on. The whole system. It's not just the base layer of the hardware and the quantum computers, but also the software, getting everything to work together and the libraries and things like that. And then the layer on top of that is the security if you've got really important IP that you want to protect with things like this.
It is an interesting relationship. As you said, a lot of these other companies, pure play quantum computing companies, you have to go out there and get customers. Being within the Honeywell ecosystem, you kind of have a big, giant industrial conglomerate doing all the stuff that you would want to experiment on with quantum computing built into the package. That's what appealed to us here is, does it work long-term? I don't know. It's just too early to say for certain, but for what it's worth, that's what I like about Quantinuum. Almost kind of like a captive customer in Honeywell, soon to be Honeywell Automation later this month.
It is neat. I've got a pretty good professional relationship with Worley, and anyone who knows quantum knows he's working on stuff at Strangeworks to build the dashboard, the interface between quantum computers and then a business. A business does not know how to use quantum computers. They want to solve their own problems that are very complex. And they tell someone else, okay, great, use the quantum on it. Here's my inputs that I have. Help me figure out this problem. And then there's kind of an interface, that a software layer. How do you define those problems in a way that a quantum computer can solve? Just like CUDA did for the GPUs with NVIDIA. You had a programmer that would want to write something in C. You'd want to have CUDA then bring it to the GPUs, and then they do the parallel computing as well. Quantinuum wants to do all of that. They want to be the problem definition that speaks with the customer, and then they'd want to have the interface, and they want to build the base hardware that's doing the computing itself, and then they also want to layer all the security and the applications on top of it. It's almost like an Amazon Web Services for quantum computing is what they're trying to do. It's really hard, but it's going to have a huge impact if they succeed.
Absolutely. Let me jump here to one more thing. On part one of our conversation, Simon, I mentioned no news flash here. I really like to use revenue as the way to measure who's actually making real progress and how. And as it stands right now, the top quantum computing pure play companies by revenue. And if you're wondering what it is you're looking at, we will have this tool out and available later this week. So you can add different companies together and just do a market share analysis. But these are just the pure play companies. So it excludes the Google, Quantum AI, IBM's work, because we don't have any visibility into what kind of revenue they're actually generating. But here they are: IonQ, Infleqtion, Quantinuum, D-Wave, and Rigetti in a distant fifth place. Total revenue distribution. It's interesting to see at this early stage, IonQ gobbling up so much of the pie, at least the publicly available information pie. And this is really interesting and telling. The big jump year over year for IonQ. Got some help with some acquisitions, and they're going to obviously get another big help again when they add in the SkyWater revenue, which is quite robust in comparison. Is this, to you, useful in putting together an allocation? If somebody wanted to put together a little basket, little mini ETF of quantum pure play companies, is it too soon to talk about this market share conversation? Or is this at all a leading indicator for who will be an early winner?
I think it's a very good leading indicator because you're going to follow where the money is. It's one thing to go out and tout how wonderful you are, and it's another to get a contract from a customer who wants to pay you for it. This will be controversial, Nick, because there's so much PR in this. You want to go out there and talk about how great you are. But to some degree, I actually like to see the PR that deals with the contracts. It's one thing to be like, oh, hey, guess how many qubits we have now? We got 1 billion qubits. We got a fault-tolerant quantum computer. Whatever it is, all the technology progress is just going to happen. But the ones that I'm really looking for is when you actually see IonQ come out there and say, hey, we got $54 million from the Air Force to do research. Or you've got another contract with some customer saying, hey, we're going to spend $50 or $100 million for this company. That's a validation that not only have they looked at them and considered them, but they've chosen them. And there's a contract that's in place for this. And I think also as you start going to the commercial side of this too, success begets success, because if you're competing with these other companies that now signs on with a quantum company, you probably are saying, oh man, I'm not going to get stuck behind. I don't want my competitor now getting a leg up on me. I need to start doing something about this too. And all of a sudden you start seeing money floating into this. I think that's kind of this point of inflection we're probably at right now, as you kind of see the disconnect between, okay, $5 million, $6 million use case, $54 million contract, next to be a $100 million contract. That really quickly accelerates a lot of those budgets to $100 million contracts, billion-dollar contracts. And all of a sudden, some of these valuations are going to start shaking out. Right now, we don't know. These companies are coming public with zero revenue or $3 billion valuations. But you sign one big partnership deal with NVIDIA or one big customer deal with a large customer that gives you $200 million for a contract, all of a sudden things blow up and the market is going to put a ton of money into these now publicly traded companies very quickly.
Yeah, it is tough to play this game. What's just noise, companies playing the PR game, and what's real. And at this early stage, I think you're right. I think there's probably a good point there where PR serves a good purpose to try to attract customers. Kind of like what Huawei's doing almost to a certain extent, like we talked about in part one of this conversation. The PR serves a purpose, even if it is maybe a bit outlandish.
I'll say one more thing just to follow up on that very last point, is that some companies do a really good job on the R&D and the technical side of it. And they put all their resources into doing all these really cool things, and it just gets lost because it doesn't translate, and no one actually went out there and talked to a customer about what they were doing. And I come from a background that's in sales that realizes that's just as important as doing something on the R&D side as figuring out how something like this is useful. And it's no surprise to me that if you look back over the past, call it 15 years of investing that we've been doing this, a couple companies that do this well immediately come to mind. Splunk did this really good for machine data and building this operating system and going out and quantifying it. Here's the ROI you get, Mr. Customer, if you use what we built for you here, our platform. And then Palantir with the commercial enterprise that they're doing stuff right now. They have entire teams of people that are going out there and quantifying for a customer, hey, here's how much money you're going to save if you use us instead of all this other stuff you got with. Quantum needs that right now. We need to move from cool technology, cool R&D project. That's great that you're reporting how many qubits you have. Go out there and make this valuable for me and make it an obvious decision on why you want to sign up with this customer to do business. That's going to be the next 2 or 3 years, I think, is you're going to start seeing these ROIs come into the conversation and these customer success teams start hiring for quantum, because we're at the point of inflection, but it really hasn't gone commercial there, Nick. From $6 million use case play budget to $1.5 trillion of economic impact. That's the commercial part of that inflection point that we have not gotten to just yet.
Yeah, could be critical years for this. How long could it be before we see full commercialization for quantum computing? That's the $1.5 trillion question.
The running joke is the answer is always 5 years, and then you go 5 more years, and then the answer is still 5 more years. If you look at the press releases and the investor presentations of these quantum companies, they're all saying 2030, which, by the way, in 2020, they were saying 2025. They keep pushing out the timelines. It's the chicken or the egg. You don't want to scale up before you've got customers that want to buy it, and customers don't want to buy it until they see that it's optimal. At some point, money's going to push this forward, though.
Yeah, it is always 5 years, and it's always a nice round number on the year as well. So as it stands right now, 2030, fully used at large scale, at low cost, That's probably more than a 5-year away problem. But it's funny how these innovations can work, though, where it's small incremental progress until all of a sudden it's not. Something happens that pushes tens or hundreds of billions of dollars of company budgets into something. I have one last question for you, Simon. Speaking of quantum computing, optimization problems, portfolio allocation, we're still early days, even though the valuations have run up on some of these pure play companies. How do you think about allocating money to quantum computing and maybe even more generally, just industries that have big potential but haven't fully developed or fully fleshed themselves out yet? How do you handle that type of optimization problem as an investor for these things that have the potential to make you a lot of money, but also potential to lose you a lot of money too?
I think for me, the approach that works, and keeping in mind that my background was at Rule Breakers at the Motley Fool, and then at Seven Investing, we had a watch list of new ideas. But you always want to be aware of what's going on that's 3 years out. Even if it seems like it's not going to be a while, you don't want to neglect that first and foremost. And then as an investor, for me personally, what works best, and everyone's approach is personal for investing, I understand that. But for me, don't entirely miss out on those trends when they actually do happen very quickly. It's okay to put $100 into 5 quantum computing companies each. And then you go back again and you say, okay, if I'm going to put another $500 and I put 100 each in these 5 companies first, maybe you're going to put that into 2 companies this time. It's like you start adding to positions a little bit until you start realizing who the winners are going to be. But don't miss the compounding you're going to get from getting in early. Because if you get $100 that all of a sudden compounds and gets a 10x or a 20x return, you don't want to look back and say, oh man, I should have had it back then. I should have bought Bitcoin when. I should have bought NVIDIA when. If you can even put a little bit in early, it'll not only keep you following what's going on because you got skin in the game, but also you get this earliest stage that the big money doesn't do anything with. They're not going out there and investing tons of money in quantum computing. The valuations aren't large enough for them to even consider anyway. And they're too risky. But as an individual investor, we get the opportunity to play there. If you lose everything and you lose $100 on one company, it's going to be okay. The math works out. If you get a 10 bagger, you're going to have a lot of mistakes early on. It's just that we're hardwired here to avoid loss and to avoid missing. But that's the game. There's so many uncertainties. A lot of these companies are going to fail. Those same companies you just showed on the market share tracker, some of those are not even going to exist in 5 years. I guarantee you. They're either going to get gobbled up or they're just going to go bankrupt. But some of those are going to do really well. And it's too early to know which ones for sure. So how do you play that game? You buy a basket, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's probably our mistake here, not taking our basket approach early enough with quantum computing. It had a couple opportunities along the way to correct that. Given how young the industry is, how early it is, probably more opportunities will come up where we get some catastrophic looking sell-offs in the stocks, valuations come down. I think we're at that point. It's worth following a bit more closely than we have followed it in the past.
Yeah. And to your point too, Nick, we are in the hottest part of the cycle right now. It's no surprise that everyone's coming public and IPOing because there's so much money right now. There's going to be a reversion to the mean here soon. And maybe that's a more opportunistic time to pounce.
Yeah. Light up those watch lists now.
Yep.
Get ready to allocate away. One more question. Could national security concerns become the biggest obstacle to commercial quantum computing rather than the technology itself? Could the quantum industry ultimately resemble the defense sector more than the software industry?
I would say yes, no doubt about that. There is security concerns with this. Again, we alluded to encryption earlier. Part of the reason that the US and China are not sharing and collaborating as much as you want them to on the technological side of this is it is competitive. Who's got the leg up? Who's got the quantum advantage that can break these security algorithms and all of a sudden hack into anything that you can't protect yourself from? Or in military, why is DARPA funding quantum computing research right now? Because you want to have the leg up. Does that limit the market size? If you can sell something to the United States, but you can't sell it to China? Ask ASML. It seems like they would always love to sell everything everywhere, but there's limitations on what can go. There's certainly national security factors to consider in this, no doubt about it.
Yeah, I think that the recent equity investments by the US government backs what you just set up, Simon. Maybe this does look more like the defense sector than the existing IT sector as it stands today. And this has kind of been the theme, though, as the IT sector has matured, it is melding with the rest of the economy more and more as time goes on. And maybe this is just like that next step in that progression. Computing power comes for the last vestiges of the economy that weren't able to use IT up until this point. This is one of the last dominoes to fall, perhaps. Optimization problems are super hard. The human brain doesn't think in terms like that. Existing classical computing doesn't think like that. But these are big problems that will get addressed here.
And on that note, I've always been a bit skeptical of how large of a market quantum computing can really have. There are customers that are very large that will spend a lot of money for this, but I tend to think of that as more of a consulting project or even a project-based budget. Quantum is going to be used everywhere. It's just not necessary to use quantum computers to the same scale like GPUs are being used in Amazon Web Services today. It's just not going to happen. There's certain problems that those can't do that are very valuable that a quantum is going to tap into. And you can make billions of dollars off of that, but it's not going to be the same scale as NVIDIA, in my opinion, because there's just no need for it, at least that we've seen out there right now.
Good point. What about quantum computers in space?
Ask Elon. That's a good question. Let's talk to Elon
Yeah.
about if he wants to put those up there too.
Let's get commercially viable quantum computers built here on Earth first. Then we can shrink them down to fit on a satellite module and launch via Falcon Heavy.
Not just space. Let's put it on another planet also while we're at it.
Yeah, the moon and Mars, and why not even further out? Okay, good stuff. Thank you, Simon, for joining me again. A little special edition CSI Live. Everybody, again, Simon Erickson from 7 Investing. The website and the service is 7investing.com. I'm sure we'll be talking more again in the near future, Simon. Thanks again. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I love being on your show. Thanks very much for having me here, Nick.
And thanks everybody for joining us. Take care. We'll see you again later this week.